at a later time. My name is Parker Agelasto. I'm the Executive Director for the Capital Region Land Conservancy, and I welcome you all tonight. This is the final of 3 learning opportunities through the 2021 Conservation Games, and we have been engaged with learning and serving and giving opportunities now for the better part of 2 weeks, since September 24th, and we will be wrapping up on October 10th with our closing ceremony at Malvern Hill. So I welcome you. Hope you can join us out there at a beautiful property. Tonight's program is part of the longer series of the Conservation Games. But to give you a little bit of background on Capital Region Land Conservancy, we were founded 15 years ago. We're fortunate to be joined this evening by our founder, Bill Greenleaf, who is also our board president. And we were founded to conserve and protect the natural and historic land and water resources for the Capital Region to the benefit of current and future generations. Since we were founded, we have achieved quite a lot. We have protected over 12,000 acres. We have helped preserve working forests, working farms. We hold the conservation easement with the Department of Conservation and Recreation and Richmond Foundation on the James River Park system. We have acquired lands that we have transferred to the city or Henrico County or Chesterfield County for future parks, and soon enough we'll be transferring land to the National Park Service. So we feel great about being able to add to the public access lands that we hold here in the Richmond region. And if you go to the next slide, Peter. And as I mentioned, the Conservation Games, this is our annual program. We did it last year for the very first time, thanks to COVID, where we had to go virtual. And we are combining it this year with going back to our celebration in person. But we have been blessed by having so many participants and the generosity of speakers like tonight's speakers and those who have partnered with us for our various volunteering activities. I would like to take this time to just thank our board members who are here this evening. There are quite a number of them. And particularly thank our co-captains for Team Forest, Heather and Andrew Pike, as well as the Team Forest sponsor, Davey Mitigation. And we will thank our other sponsors at the end of the program. But I'm going to hand it over to Peter Braun, who can then explain a little bit more about the games. Thank you all for joining.
Hi, everyone. Like Parker said, my name is Peter Braun, and I'm the Community Engagement Manager at the Capital Region Land Conservancy, and I'm also the referee for the Conservation Games. And I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, have heard about the Conservation Games. That's why you're here. But just in case you haven't, the Conservation Games is a multi-week virtual experience to celebrate and support CRLC's efforts to conserve our region's natural and historic resources. We've had 2 other learning events, learning webinars over the past 2 weeks. We've had 2 volunteer events, and we have 1 more volunteer event this Saturday. Our 3 teams, Team Fields, Team Forest, and Team Streams, have competed to earn the most number of points through those events and through fundraising campaigns. And like I said, we have 1 more volunteer event, which this Saturday is a tree planting and is the only event we've had to sell out. And then on Sunday, we have our closing ceremony. And if you haven't tuned into the conversation, the competition so far, I want to give you a little bit of inspiration, give everybody the energy to push for those last few points, because this competition isn't over. Right now, despite the previous leads of Team Forest and Team Streams, Team Fields is in the lead with 12,215 points. They are also, as of this morning, they were the leader in donations. But as of this afternoon, Team Forest received 2 donations, which unlocked their challenge grant. There was a donation, 2 donations totaling $1,500, and unlocked another $1,000 donation. So that would put their donations at 4,400, I believe. Thank you, quick math. So Team Fields is the team to beat, and we are still in this. There's still more competition to go. And I'm excited to introduce our Team Forest co-captains. We have Heather Barrar and Andrew Pike, and I'll turn it over to them.
Great, thank you, Peter and Parker. It's good to be here. This is my second year as co-captain for Team Forest. I have been involved with Capital Region Land Conservancy since the very beginning, going to the first meetings before Capital Region was even an organization, and really thankful to be a board member the last couple of years working with Capital Region Land Conservancy. I am a forester. I have an undergraduate degree in forestry, recreation, and a graduate degree in environmental policy, and thankful that my volunteer work and my day work both are doing land conservation as I'm building a greenway and regional park system on the Appomattox River during the day and doing all this work with Capital Region as my volunteer work. So thankful to be here, thankful to have all of you with us, and I'm going to turn it over to Andrew.
Thanks so much, Heather. So I'm Andrew Pike. I'm an advisory board member at the Capital Region Land Conservancy. I've been serving in that capacity for a few years after coming back to Richmond, my hometown. So I've got a background in land conservation too. Previously worked on national conservation issues, wilderness designations, national monument proclamations, and currently work at the Virginia Department of Transportation in their environmental division on planning studies. So I'm very excited to be a part of CRLC and play a very small role in all the conservation successes and achievements that this organization makes happen. So I'm going to do a few more slides, starting with kind of an introductory icebreaker slide. So feel free to kind of jump into the chat, type in a chat, or yeah, I think just chat, sorry. So question is, which tree or woodland creature do you most identify with? So it can be a plant, it can be an animal, fungi, anything that speaks to you and calls the forest home. So take a second, type something in the chat box. We'll read a couple off. Kind of a fun way to get things started. All right, seeing some love for, we got a lot of love for oak trees. And the pawpaw, beech tree, bald cypress, nice variety. All right, black gum, raccoon, deer, oh my goodness, overwhelming response. Foxes, loblolly pine, weeping willow. Very good. Appreciate everyone jumping in and participating. Gives us a sense of, you know, maybe the tree species within the forest are calling to a lot of people, and a few folks are talking about the animal species there too. We'll move on to the next slide. So, you know, we've just talked about, you know, some of the personal things that we identify with as individuals in the forest. And so we just wanted to highlight, you know, some of the things that resonate with us when we talk about supporting forests. So if you were with us on the opening ceremony back 10, 14 days ago or so, I talked about some of the reasons that forests are important to me, you know, thinking about the quiet and solitude you can experience deep within a forest, kind of the awe and the majesty that a giant tree can command, or simple things like the shade that a tree provides on a hot hike. So we know that there are a lot of benefits that forests provide for us. And my daughter Josie's here to join us. So there are human benefits, right? We spend time in the forest, and that can help reduce our stress. There are places that can be outdoor classrooms. We can get out there and hike, hunt, walk. They provide food and medicine, and there are also environmental benefits, right? We're going to hear more about that from our distinguished panelists tonight. So forests support biodiversity, they capture carbon to fight climate change, and they reduce heat and capture runoff in cities. And so to that end, we are going to get our hands dirty on Saturday at the Science Museum of Virginia in downtown Richmond to work on our service event. So this is our volunteer event. We'll be planting trees, working within the Richmond Tree Lab. Due to overwhelming demand, the event is actually sold out. So we're really excited and energized by that turnout. We will be holding the event rain or shine. If you're registered, please bring a raincoat, bring a mask, a face mask, and some water. And we'll meet at the entrance to the Protopath, which is near the side of the Children's Museum. And more information will be coming from Peter about that. If you weren't able to register because we maxed out, please feel free to do your own service event. We heard that some Team Forest friends went out to Pony Pasture in the city and did some cleanup. So, you can certainly do something on your own and let Jane Myers or Peter know, and we can count those points towards Team Forest. And then our final event is the closing ceremony. So that's on Sunday afternoon at 4 o'clock out at Malvern Hill. And it's not only a chance to crown the champions of the conservation games, it's also a chance to get to know one another, to talk with folks in the conservation community in Richmond and enjoy good food and drinks and live music. We are asking for a $25 suggested donation to help cover the food and drinks and entertainment. And you can still register online for that. With that, thank you. Thank you for being part of Team Forest. And I'll turn it back to Heather to introduce our distinguished guests.
Thanks, Andrew. So when Andrew and I were talking about, our service and our learning event, we really wanted to highlight, the importance of forests both at our urban, suburban scale, and of course, our working forests, hundreds and thousands of acres. We really kind of wanted to cover that whole breadth of what forestry is and means to us in our daily lives. So we thought of some great partners. We have a state partner. Terrance Lasher is the Assistant State Forester with Department of Forestry. And we also invited another nonprofit partner to come. Christine Cadigan is a Senior Director with the Family Forest Carbon Program with the American Forest Foundation. So we just have two folks to talk to you a little bit about forest management from a couple different perspectives and really how we are looking at forestry a little bit differently than we did even 10 or 20 years ago. So we're going to turn it over to them. If you have questions, please put those in the chat box and we will get to those at the end of the program. We will have time for that at the end, so please go ahead and chat while the question's fresh on your mind. Go ahead and put it in there and Peter will help facilitate that at the end. So I'm going to turn it over to Christine and Terry, and thank you guys so much for giving up an evening for us and helping us learn more about forestry.
Thanks, Heather. I am just pulling up my slides here, I hope. Okay. You guys see that okay? Okay. Sorry, I'm new to Teams, so okay, it looks good. Great. Thank you. Well, thank you guys again for inviting me to participate. Again, I'm Christine Cadigan. I'm the Senior Director for the Family Forest Carbon Program at the American Forest Foundation. And for those of you who might be unfamiliar with AFF, with my organization, we're a national forest conservation organization that specifically works with and through family forests. So our particular forest conservation niche is to work with these private individual and family landowners and identify ways that we can work and empower them to be good stewards for specific conservation impact. And so I in particular work on our forest carbon program, where obviously our motivation there is to realize material climate mitigation. A little bit about me. So I am obviously I work like Heather. My day job and my life kind of interact. They go well. They complement each other well. But I'm also a forest landowner. So I live in Western Powhatan, really kind of the western edge of the map that Parker showed earlier of the CRLC region. We've got about 100 acres, about 90 of those acres are forested. And we live and work here on our tree farm. It's really exciting. It's a real joy to be able to do that. We are also exploring an easement with CRLC too. Both my husband and I have obviously this conservation ethic, so are looking for a way to ensure the legacy of our little piece of property here in Western Powhatan. So I just wanted to start the sort of theme for this evening is ecosystem services and potential ecosystem markets. And given that I'm focused on forest carbon and carbon markets, I thought I would just start by giving us a little bit of foundation for why carbon markets, why we're even talking about carbon markets in the first place. And I know there's been a lot of news recently on more and more companies setting these sustainability goals, specifically net zero goals. It's actually really impressive to see all of the sort of corporate individuals leaning into this space, or corporate entities rather, leaning into this space, even, you know, despite some of the confusion or back and forth that we might see at the federal level, at least within the US. And it's really driven, it's not just companies that are greenwashing. This is a lot of investors and other stakeholders and shareholders asking for corporate accountability and making sure that they're mitigating risks in their supply chain. And so when you think about carbon markets, these companies who are setting these net zero goals are tasked with addressing their scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. So scope 1 emissions are direct emissions from their facility, from producing the goods or services that we enjoy. Scope 2 are their indirect emissions, so that's the electricity, et cetera, that powers their business. And then, of course, much more intangible, at least at this point, until some of the rules are written, piece that they have to account for is their scope 3 emissions. And these are basically supply chain emissions, upstream and downstream, where they source their raw goods and materials. And then, you know, eventually when it gets to the consumer, sort of the path or the journey that the good or service took to get to the end user. So companies are trying to inventory all of these emissions. They're trying to account for these emissions and are looking for solutions to neutralize the emissions that they're otherwise producing. We also talk a little bit about the emission reduction hierarchy. This is important for our program in particular because we only work with companies who follow this emission reduction hierarchy that ensures that actually the credits that we're selling are going to be meaningful in the atmosphere. And so the first step is, of course, avoiding the emissions that they're generating. Next step is reducing those emissions as best they can, energy efficiency improvements, for example. The third step is to replace those emissions with alternative opportunities. And then last, and certainly not least, but the last thing that they should do is to neutralize or compensate their residual emissions. So these are things that there's really no best available technology to replace the emission, or it's just cost prohibitive at this point. And so that's when these companies look at carbon markets and say, we need help neutralizing the residual emissions that we can't otherwise deal with. And that's where our program comes in, and that's where forests writ large can contribute to the solution. The other thing to mention too, so I talked about how we've seen a lot of companies set these targets over the past couple of years. That is only going to we're only going to see that more and more over the next couple of years, actually. People have studied carbon markets, particularly over the last couple of years, and if we're going to stay on a 1.5 to 2 degree pathway, warming pathway, if that's what we're going to do, and if these companies really align their net zero goals around that global climate goal that we have, we expect the voluntary carbon market to explode anywhere from 5 to 30 times over the next decade, 2 decades. So it's an extreme explosion of demand. And actually what we're probably going to see is that the supply can't meet that demand, which really sets natural climate solutions and forests up, sets them up well to benefit from this infusion of private climate finance. So what role can forests play? The Nature Conservancy, our partner in the Family Forest Carbon Program, recently released some research that said that natural climate solutions can contribute over 1/3 of the potential climate mitigation solution to stay on this 2-degree warming pathway. And that's particularly over the next decade, so by 2030, when we actually need these solutions the most, because you can see the longer we wait, the harder the problem is to solve. So natural climate solutions can provide some real opportunities over the next couple of years. And in particular, when you look at what makes up natural climate solution opportunities, of course, there are wetlands, ag and grasslands, some other land-based opportunities, but forests really, you can see here, not only do they provide the most opportunity in terms of absolute value of carbon storage and sequestration, but the green shading here articulates the cost effectiveness of those options. So forests provide the greatest opportunity and some of the cheapest options in a decade where we need solutions the most. And so just translating this potential to the marketplace, so the orange bars are what you see, the carbon credits that are attributed to forest carbon projects today. And the green bar is if we were actually to lean into some of those, to some of the estimates produced in that paper that I was just talking about before, we could actually see some tremendous growth in forest carbon credits that are otherwise exchanged in the carbon marketplace. So how do we put forests to work? That's what I eat, sleep, and breathe in my day job. So through the American Forest Foundation, we've partnered with the Nature Conservancy and developed the Family Forest Carbon Program, particularly because both of our organizations recognized that there was a real opportunity to work with family-owned forests to be a climate mitigation solution. Families own the largest portion of U.S. forests, and here in the U.S., here in the East Coast, rather, it's much more dominant. And I think Terry's going to share a little bit more about that. So if we really want to put our U.S. forests to work, we've got to figure out how to work with these folks. Unfortunately, how traditional forest carbon projects have been designed thus far, they really capitalize on economies of scale. And small family forest owners like myself, we can't get these types of projects to pencil out, right? So actually less than 1% of the projects that have been exchanged thus far have ownerships of less than 1,000 acres. And we know these family forest owners own, 60 to 70 acres on average. So it's a opportunity that's just not well suited for family forest owners to take advantage of it. And that's why we developed this program to reduce some of the barriers to entry and capitalize on efficiency in other ways that doesn't depend on large individual properties. So our goal through the Family Forest Carbon Program is to reach 20% of family-owned forests by the end of the decade. We estimate that we can sequester and store 2 billion tons of CO2 by the end of the century, which is material climate mitigation at a global level. And importantly, doing that, we're infusing this private climate finance into forest conservation, which has so many other co-benefits, like enhancing wildlife habitat, improving forest health, protecting water quality, all of the things that we love about our forests. If we can give landowners additional revenue streams to keep their forest healthy, then we can appreciate these other ecosystem services into the future. So our Family Forest Carbon Program, it differs from traditional forest carbon projects in a couple of ways. The first is that we identify opportunities with really short-term contracts. So that was a barrier to entry for many landowners, is this long-term intergenerational planning was difficult for them. So we try to shorten that. we focus on forest management activity and practices that landowners can implement. So it's very concrete. If you implement these specific practices, we have our science team has identified that there's an associated carbon benefit with that at a landscape scale. Landowners are, of course, there's incentive payments associated with being able to implement these practices. I should have said that at the outset. We do actually try to spread our payments out across the contract period, but do incentivize and motivate sign up by providing a lump sum at the beginning, or a larger lump sum at the beginning. And importantly, we're also providing landowners with access to technical assistance and other landowner networks. So actually in our pilot in Pennsylvania, 2/3 of the landowners who've enrolled in the program thus far have never met with a forester, have never had a management plan. And through our program, we're actually able to connect them with this expertise and set them on a path for sustainable management for the long term, which is pretty exciting. The other cool thing about our program, which I don't have a ton of time to go into, is that it involves a new carbon accounting methodology. And you might have seen some critiques out there in Bloomberg or the Wall Street Journal about forest carbon projects and whether they're credible or rigorous enough. We actually feel really passionate about our methodology because it feels like we address a lot of the critiques in some really innovative ways. So we're excited about that. To be eligible, we're focused on, again, privately owned family forests. So as small as 30 acres and as large as 2,400 acres. And that cap is really just to focus our resource and our attention on this constituency. So it certainly, larger landowners can certainly use our methodology and take advantage of that as well. Right now, we're focused in the Central Appalachians. That's where our pilot took place, and we just expanded this week into the rest of Pennsylvania, all of West Virginia, and Western Maryland, and hope to do the surrounding states in another year or so. But we're simultaneously developing regional modules in the Midwest, the Northeast, and actually the Southeast. So hoping to expand pretty rapidly. We have, like I mentioned, we have specific practices that are applicable to each of our regions, and there will be some criteria of the actual land to be eligible for some of those practices. So we have a platform where landowners can log on and identify whether or not their land meets that specific criteria and would be eligible for those practices. Yeah, I guess this is a intuitive bullet, right? So landowners who are interested in contributing to this solution, to being a part of the program, and of course, receiving incentives and additional revenue streams, as well as technical assistance and management planning as part of their participation. So the last slide, I just want to talk about, because I think our business model is also a little bit innovative and worth discussing. But we, in order to give landowners these fixed or guaranteed payments over time and right at the time of signing, we actually have to acquire low-cost capital as a program. So we're seeking debt financing in the form of a loan or a green bond, which we'll use to pay landowners their incentive payments right at the outset. And in exchange for that, landowners, of course, sign a contract with us, and they give the program rights to the carbon, which we take the responsibility to verify, to monitor, and to eventually monetize it on the carbon market, on the voluntary carbon market. We sell those credits to buyers. So we've got 3 buyers lined up already. Amazon was our first buyer. We just announced this week that REI is our second buyer. And we've got another Fortune 500 company that we'll announce over the next couple of weeks. That's also going to be a buyer of our credits. And we use revenue from the sale of these credits to pay back, of course, principal and interest on the debt that we've acquired. But it is unique and different from how traditional forest carbon projects work, and that we do need to seek this low cost capital to kind of make our machine run, if you will. But it enables us to provide these fixed guaranteed payments to landowners who depend on that revenue to implement the specific activity that they're working on. So with that, Terry, I think I've set you up to focus more specifically on some opportunities in Virginia.
All right, thank you, Christine. I will try to get my file share up here. And see if I can't get it going. That was an excellent presentation. I think you really did capture quite a bit of the complexities of carbon, but also some of the benefits of carbon going forward. Can everybody see my screen?
Yeah, we can see your file explorer.
Oh, okay. Well, that's not what we want to see.
You clearly have a lot of work, Terry.
Sorry about that. Let's see here. See, this is what I told you I'd screw this up, Peter, in some way.
All good. If you need me to share your presentation, I can try that.
Yeah, let's try this one more time here real quick. Am I just showing and sharing you guys at the moment? How about now? Just my files, right?
Now we can see your PowerPoint.
Oh, okay, great. All right, so I'm Terry Lasher. I am the Assistant State Forester with the Virginia Department of Forestry. I'm glad to be here. This was something that I was approached with by Peter and Andrew and Heather and Parker as well, and it just seemed like a great fit and great timing. We're going to talk a little bit about some of that complexity that Christine mentioned with the people who own our forests, the people who've been offering ecosystem services to society really for free, to include aesthetics, something that doesn't get talked about a whole lot, but there's a reason why people come to Virginia in the fall, and it's because of the beauty of our forests, maybe some of our wine as well. I want to capitalize a little bit on something that Heather mentioned too, and that was about 10 to 20 years ago, foresters, natural resource managers, we understood that there were ecosystem services, but it wasn't really something that we focused on. We focused on how do we grow cords and boards? How do we benefit forest health? How do we manage silviculturally for habitats and multiple landowner benefits? But when we just talked about air quality or water quality or even carbon, it was sort of one of those fringe sciences almost. There was a handful of people that were out there doing it and doing great work and laying a foundation for us going forward. And that's kind of where we are now. The demand for carbon credits as a climate change alternative is certainly growing and is alive. So let's go ahead and jump right in here. We're going to go with just some of the basics of land here in Virginia and land ownership patterns. And I wanted to first touch on ecosystem services as a whole. Generally, the Forest Service says it's an ecological life support system. And tonight we're going to dig a little bit deeper in that. They also say that ecosystem services are commonly defined as benefits that people obtain from an ecosystem. They include different basic services like provisioning services, things that help us like food, fresh water, wood and fiber, medicine, and services that are less tangible and harder to measure, but are equally critical, like regulating services that look at carbon sequestration, which you just heard about from Christine, erosion control and pollination, cultural services, things like recreation, ecotourism, educational and spiritual values, and supporting services like nutrient cycling, soil formations, and primary productivity. Tonight, I'm going to bring us into a little bit of who owns our forest, the composition of our forest. Then we're going to talk about sort of the next ecosystem services that we see, which is water, and touch a little bit on air and the contributions that are there. I often get asked a question about, well, how much of a market is there? How much is ecosystem services worth? And the most recent number that I found was from 1997, and it was from Robert Costanza. and his colleagues, and they estimated that the worldwide value of ecosystem services at that time was $33 trillion. So here's a view of our forests. Virginia is currently about 62% forested. Where you see green, that's our forest. Where you see brown is either developed areas or our open areas, our ags in our fields. You can see the dismal swamp down there in the very far southeastern portion is very dark green. So what's the makeup of our forests? Well, we have 16 million acres. 61% of those are privately owned. And this is important because these are the people who provide society with the ecosystem services, with these benefits, and largely they've been providing them for free. And so everybody likes air, everybody needs water, and we all need both, right? So when we look at how that demographic is broken up, it's also important to know who owns that forest. Not only is it privately owned, but currently in Virginia, 71% of our forest landowners are male, and their average age is 64. And that's something something we need to focus on here at the Conservation Land Conservation Regional Land Commission here to look at and really say, what are we going to do when we have the largest intergenerational land transfer here in Virginia? And it's going to happen. Our focus on our conservation easement program at the Department of Forestry is to kind of keep those lands in the family intact and in perpetuity. That's going to be a challenge for all of us in this business. For this to work, we must keep the forest profitable. If not, people start to search for other alternatives to their forest, right? They start to consider development, parcelizing their forest, which leads to fragmentation. And all of those things are negative attributes to what we're all trying to accomplish, either trying to grow trees or trying to keep habitat. Further, our forests are 22% pine trees and 78% mixed hardwood or hardwood pine, and we'll dial that in a little bit further too. So here's our forest landowner ownership. 61% is individual and family. National forest, which is largely in the western portion of the Commonwealth, is 10%. Other public, which are parks, regional park authorities, those kinds of things, about 7%. Forest industry is at 1%, and corporate ownership is at 21%. So what do our forest types look like? Well, oak hickory is our primary forest type. We'll see how that's distributed here in a second on a map. Oak pine is 11%. Pine plantations, contrary to belief, it all depends on where you are in the state when you're driving around this fall. Pine plantations are 14%. Natural pine is 7%. Maple beech birch, which is at our higher elevations, is 2%. And bottomland hardwood, which is the opposite, at the lower elevations, is about 5%. When we start to look at forest cover and types on the map, we start to see where the oak hickory group is the largest, demonstrated here by the big orange colors. And then you can see where the loblolly, shortleaf pine, and longleaf slash pine are, which is mostly in the coastal plain. So what does forest and forest composition have to do with ecosystem services? Well, remember, the Forest Service says that it's an ecological life support system. So when we start to look at what our forests provide, they provide habitat, clean air, clean water, renewable, sustainable forest products, which includes that traditional cords and boards, which is important. You know, these are renewable resources that we use for homes, furniture, barrels, fences, lots of other things. We have our panel products, which are mass timber or engineered wood products, renewable energy sources, which is biomass. Christine had mentioned carbon-free. There's another side of the house where people are looking at carbon neutral as well. And then we also have cellulose, which is sustainable biomaterials, medicines, toothpaste, food, shampoos, things like that. And then, of course, we have our fiber, which is paper and packaging. And that doesn't include some of the other things that we all like to think of, like tree bark, sap, fruits, nuts, seeds, apples, pears, peaches, rubber, adhesive, gums, flavorings, dyes, inks, vanishes, and of course, my favorite, syrup. So when we talk about forest ownership, forest management, and sustainability. I often get the question of, well, aren't we cutting everything? I'm seeing lots of clear cuts. We're not sustainable. Well, contrary to that is the truth. When we look at where we are based upon our forest inventory and analysis data, we're seeing that our hardwood is growing at over 2.5 to 1. So for every tree we cut, we're growing 2.5 more. And equally important is that ratio on our softwood as well, where for every tree we cut, we are growing somewhere around 2.25. And dare I mention that forests also have contributed a lot to jobs in the economy. Forestry in Virginia is a $21 billion industry, 108,000 jobs. It's the number 3 overall industry in Virginia. Number 1 is agriculture. Number 2 is tourism. Combined under our Secretary of Ag and Forestry, Virginia is well positioned, and so is our forest as a number 1. And for every $1 million that is invested in a nature-based type of solution like forests and green infrastructure, 7 to 40 jobs are created. And that kind of depends on where you are into what it is that you're investing in. And that's why there's such a large gap in those numbers. What I'd like to do now is talk a little bit about drinking water and drinking water supplies. We don't often think about the contributions of forests when we turn on a tap. For a forester and for folks in our business and natural resources, we certainly do. And we also understand that good forest management is one way that people in the rural parts of Virginia contribute to the quality of life and health of people in the more urbanized areas, as 50% of our drinking water in Virginia comes from surface water flows that go through our forests. This graph shows, or this image shows, a little bit about the southeast region of the United States. 44.3% of the total water supply comes through state and private forests. You can take a peek at some of these numbers. They're pretty impressive. Tells a good story about the contributions of what our forests do bring. And as I mentioned, in Virginia, 50% of our population, but also 5.9 million people in 13 other states are served by Virginia's clean water coming through their forests. All in total, that's an estimation of 10.2 million people enjoying the good clean water that comes through Virginia. Of that, family-owned forests account for about 68% of that surface water. The cleaner the source water is, the less treatment it requires, and that helps lower the costs for the municipalities. A survey of 7 U.S. cities recently showed that avoided costs for treatment was between $725,000 to $300 million annually, and that depends on a lot of different factors, but I think the numbers there are what really we need to focus on and to speak to. 1 acre of forest reduces cloudiness or turbidity in water by 3%. In 2000, the Forest Service economists estimated the minimum value of water from just the national forest system lands was to be somewhere around $3.7 billion per year. There are some great examples of the benefits of clean water and forest and that interaction in Maine, New York, Tennessee, and Arkansas, as well as here in Virginia. Here's a map, and it takes a little bit to kind of digest this thing, but if we take a look, it starts to show you a little bit about the public water system intakes. So the colors indicate the percentage of state private forest ownerships, and then a population served is by the number, or by the size, excuse me, of the circles. So when we look at things like rural Virginia and you see the valley there, you see that public water intakes are somewhere around 0 to 25%, and that makes sense because folks are using more well water. But if we start to look a little bit more in our populated areas, Northern Virginia, Richmond, down into Newport News and Hampton Roads, as well as some of our larger cities in the southwestern portion of Virginia, like Roanoke, Lynchburg, you can start to see that the influence or the necessity of having much more drinking water coming through our forests, serving larger populations, is certainly important. And one of the reasons why it is important for for forests to manage for water quality and quantity is because trees and forests are great hydrologic pumps. When we start to manipulate the number of stems or the species of trees per acre on a given setting, we can start to manipulate some of those overland flows as well. Predictions in the Southeast United States are that the region will experience an increase in drought events over the next few decades. This will impact some of our water availability, especially our surface water. This is demonstrated throughout the last 2 decades. In the 2000s, we had increased droughts, and that increase started to cause a decrease in precipitation events, somewhere around 54%, and a 90% decrease in stream flows. So pretty important. So when we talk about how we can look at land use, or how we can pay for land use or water cleaning and forest treatments or green infrastructure type projects, here's a little bit of a diagram of some possibilities. What we find is that often the true value of good land use is unclear to the public, but letting the environment work for you is a very cost-effective approach. The financial values becomes more clear when the cost of protecting an ecosystem for improved water quality are compared with the investments in new or improved water treatment facilities. So we can definitely start to put some sort of a number together about gray infrastructure versus green infrastructure and the amount of water and the water treatment that needs to occur. Ways to fund that is fees, taxes, grants, loans, numerous state and federal programs that currently support source water protection, such as the EPA's Clean Water Act and Safe Drinking Water Act, and here at home, the Virginia Department of Health Source Water Protection Program. Green infrastructure practices have less cost than gray infrastructure. Christine had mentioned co-benefits. I usually refer to them as stackable benefits so that you can kind of start to see where these things really stack up. Because when you're managing forests, you're managing habitat, you're managing for lots of other things at the same time. Co-benefits certainly does work. We can incentivize retention of forests and working lands if we start to invest in our private land ownerships. I apologize for a little bit of the blurriness here. This was a small graphic, but I thought that we should take a look at it because we're going to move into a little bit of a talk about some of our urban forests as well. We can start to see where precipitation falls, sediment and surface runoff comes down. The buffer there before the stream helps to slow down some of that nutrient runoff and sediment. We also have infiltration and deposition, which goes to our groundwater recharge. So water quality and quantity. We had a nice intern this past summer who came up with this graphic, and it's something that we can look at and get a pretty good idea of what it is that we're talking about with the benefits of trees. So if we look at our urban areas, not only do forests provide outdoor recreation, clean water, fresh air, and lower energy costs, they also provide higher property values and lower crime rates. They also lower temperatures somewhere between 2 and 25 degrees from shade, and the evapotranspiration rates assist with that as well, in that cooling. There are currently 12 different urban heat island studies being conducted in Virginia. The data was collected this past July, is now being analyzed. We'll be able to say, because of where the heat islands are, these folks don't have trees, these folks have trees, and they'll start to really dictate or allow us to better focus our tree planting efforts to have the best benefit. When we look at larger storm events or much broader impacts because of conversion, they protect against erosion. It's just a win-win when we start talking about trees. When municipalities invest in protecting forested watersheds, they're taking advantage of the natural essential processes of forests that results in clean water. Water runoff of hard surfaces carries along pollutants. Trees filter out many of those pollutants and contaminants before they even reach the waterway, and they act as buffers to absorb that rainfall, slow the stormwater flow, and refill groundwater recharge areas. So when we look at air is a little bit less. While it's very important, it certainly has a little bit less data. There's a lot more research that we need to do about air quality and air quality credits, but contributions of forest to air is quantitatively, it's somewhat unknown. Qualitatively, we get it. We understand that we have more trees, we have better air. We understand that we have less cases of cardiac disease and things like that. But intuitively, it works. They do what they do, and they have their great benefits. We did find in some of the research that there's a bit more benefit to health in urban areas than in rural areas because there are more people, and the uptake of contaminants is greater in the rural area because there you have more trees. So it kind of depends on which side you want to look at. But how they work for air quality is trees remove air pollution by the interception of particulate matter on plant surfaces and then through absorption of the gaseous pollutants through the stomata. What is measured and how we measure it is the Clean Air Act requires the EPA to set a national ambient air quality standard for 6 different pollutants. They're all common throughout the United States, and they all contribute to negative human welfare. Those are carbon monoxide, nitrogen dioxide, ozone, lead, sulfur dioxide, and particulate matter. Part of the reason for the uncertainty about how well trees are doing is that trees just vary, and so do forests in their composition, their species, their ages, their position on the landscape. So it becomes a little bit more of a challenge to say, this acre of forest is just like that acre of forest, so they must be equal, because they just aren't. So much more research is needed. The total amount of pollution removed by trees and forests in the United States was somewhere around 17 million tons, with a human health value of $6.8 billion per year. So now we need to talk just briefly about forest management and benefits of forest management. Regardless of what market you're going after, if you're going after carbon, you're going after water, or if you're going after air, you're just going after habitat and cords and boards type of traditional production, active forest management is a must in order to improve results and performance of your forest. You can sequester more carbon with faster growing trees with certain species, so you benefit there as well. I think one of the things that's unique about carbon is it's not just that you're managing for carbon specifically, but you're growing trees while you're doing it. So it's just an add-on. It's like an extra benefit that you can recoup periodically throughout the lifespan of your cycle or of your forest and grow cycle, and put it right back into the investment in that property. People have been impacting the Virginia landscape since before European settlement. And I throw that in there because we need to understand where we're starting from. Our forests and our forest land has not been a pristine, untouched preserve. It has been manipulated for hundreds of years, eons almost, I would say. And we need to understand that when we just back away from that now, it's not going to take care of itself. It's been too heavily manipulated, and we need to continue to do strong silvicultural prescriptions and good management. Preservation and conservation are different. They are not the same. They don't have the same approaches. With preservation, we start to run into, what happens when the insects come, what happens when there's overcrowding, what happens when people build right up next to a preserve, things like that, human impacts and human nature interactions. We must continue to manage the forest to achieve health, habitat, and a broad suite of ecosystem services. And education of our public really provides us our social license to do the work that we do. It helps us to bring a broad suite of products and to also do good silvicultural work. And as I mentioned before, we need to have some continuous research projects. In the past year, in fiscal year 2021, the Department of Forestry assisted a little over 1,100 landowners with 50,000 acres of reforestation during our Reforestation of Timberlands program. That equaled 83,000 acres of trees. The Department of Forestry staff wrote 2,000 stewardship plans over 33,000 acres. We had an additional conservation activity plans on 12,000, almost 13,000 acres. And our tree farm plans, bring it back to Christine, we wrote 19 plans on a little over 4,000 acres in that 1 year. So active forest management is alive and well in Virginia, and assisting landowners is certainly something that we hang our hats on. Useful management you to kind of take a look at them. We often hear or get asked questions about water quality from timber harvesting, and are we doing the right thing? Are we following BMPs? Aren't we polluting streams with sediment? And the answer is no. Right now, the Department of Forestry achieves better than 95% compliance on all harvesting sites across the Commonwealth. It's a little bit higher than that in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. We're at about 96.5% compliance on a voluntary program. What that means is that the department has gone out and looked at 4,623 timber harvests, inspected 20,000 different times, so about 4.5 visits or so per harvest to make sure that water quality was being adhered to and that we didn't have any problems. And another thing that's been coming up here recently in the news is if we're going to plant all of these trees, where are we getting them? DOF Nurseries sold a total of 30 million seedlings of 56 different varieties in the past year. And we're hopeful that we can expand that production with some money that was just granted to us by the General Assembly to purchase some equipment to basically return some fallow fields into hardwood production growing sites. And with that, I am all done.
Thank you, Terry. That was a great presentation. Really got to all the basics of forest management that a lot of people don't hear about. And it connects well to giving some context to those family forest carbon programs. I think we might have time for one quick question, but if not, ask your questions in the chat and we can move on to our next portion of our program. I do see one quick question from Betsy Agelasto. She asked, do acres of apple orchards qualify as a forest?
Probably more agriculture.
And I see that Christine has been answering some questions in the chat. So thank you for doing that as well as we went along.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if I mentioned it, but there was when we say that there's 61%, it's like 500,000 landowners that are contributing to that number of land ownership here in Virginia. So that's an awful lot of people to engage. And I think it goes back to some of the difficulties that Christine was mentioning with, you got to try to get these folks who own smaller acreages together, aggregate them so that they can take advantage of some of these larger programs.
Absolutely, and here in Virginia, we are an older state, and therefore, for 400 years, land has been fragmented and into smaller and smaller and smaller tracts, whereas perhaps out west, they have not suffered the same, and so we tend to deal with smaller tracts, so aggregation is certainly the way that we need to go if we're going to help mitigate any kind of impacts from climate change here locally. So I agree, thank you.
Eileen asked in the chat if you could share your contact information. Would you be able to type that in the chat? I think that's for both of our presenters. Okay. Well, I have something special for you guys. Since this is part of the conservation games, we have something fun for you to do. Tie all that knowledge back together into some trivia.
So Terry, we're going to make sure that you get all of these questions correct.
I'll do my best, Parker.
So the rules are just write down the answer to the questions on a piece of paper, on your phone, somewhere else. And then at the end, if you've gotten 2 or more questions right, you can get 25 points for your team. And there'll be more instructions on how to make sure you get those points. So question 1. An easy one, I think. What is Virginia's official state tree? Is it A, the southern magnolia, B, the flowering dogwood, C, the southern live oak, or D, the loblolly pine? And I wish I had the Jeopardy music playing in the background.
I thought it was a sequoia tree.
So we got some answers in the chat, and the answer is B, the flowering dogwood. And the flowering dogwood is both the Virginia state or Commonwealth tree, but it's also the state flower. And you can see them flowering around Easter time. Question 2. The bark of which tree has traditionally been used as a pain reliever, as it contains the same active ingredient as aspirin? Is it the American sycamore, the river birch, pawpaw, or willow? And the answer is the willow. You can see these. That tree is around a small pond. They really like water, and if you have some, drainage pipes running on your property, probably don't plant a willow right next to them because they will find a way in. But next to a creek or a pond is a perfect place for them. Question 3. Which tree native to Virginia was traditionally carved by indigenous peoples to build canoes? Is it the white oak, the tulip poplar, the red maple, or the shortleaf pine? Give me a minute to think about that. A, B. I think the most popular answer is the correct one, the tulip poplar. And in the spring, you can see those beautiful flowers high up in the canopy. And that's why they're called a tulip tree. Question 4, true or false? Only live trees make good habitat for wildlife. Only live trees? They're living. Sounds pretty good. That's how we like them. Anyway, the answer is false. Both live trees and trees that have died make good habitat, especially for things like this little raccoon. You can even see there are some grasses growing off the edge of that decaying tree, and I'm sure there are fungi and all kinds of insects living in there as well. And our last question, which tree species has the largest individual tree in Virginia, according to the Virginia Big Tree Program? So not which tree can grow the largest, which individual tree is the largest in Virginia? Is it the American elm, the tulip poplar, the willow oak, or the water tupelo? Let's see. Everyone seems to think it's C. Okay, cypress. I don't think it's a cypress. In Virginia, the answer is the water tupelo. And the largest individual tree in Virginia is located in Greensville, Virginia. It has a height of 108 feet and a circumference of 363 inches. Its crown size is 53 feet wide. And largest is sort of a composite of all these measurements, so not just the tallest tree. And they have a whole point ranking system. I'd love to go see that tree. And so if you got 2 more correct, you can email your team's staff liaison with your correct answers to earn 25 points towards your team. If you've attended this talk, you already got 75 points, and that is already counted. But just make sure you email your staff liaison, and there are their email addresses for each team. Yeah, sorry if I stumped you.
Well, thank you, Peter. Thank you very much, Christine and Terry. Very, very informative. And I think a lot of people at home don't fully appreciate what we need to be doing to attack the climate crisis, and how trees really do add not just to carbon sequestration, but to air quality, water quality, habitat. There's so many benefits that come as a result. So thank you for sharing that. We will gladly share your slides and the presentation with everyone so that they can then distribute and get more people educated and informed about what we should be doing, particularly here in the Capital Region. So I appreciate that. I will say, and I'm going to give a shout out to my colleague Jay Myers, who is also a forester, and she is the staff liaison for Team Forest. But we came across a beech tree on a property that CRLC acquired, and trust me, we tried to measure that thing to see if it was a state champion tree. It had the canopy was almost 100 feet wide. And Jane, do you recall what the circumference of the tree was? Like 9 feet?
Oh, I do not recall, but there's some business about how you can measure it because it had multiple stems.
Yeah.
So it made it a little bit tricky.
Yep. And of course, as an American beech, I think there were some people's initials carved into it. So still the tradition continues. But I'd also like to just thank again our sponsors, Davey Mitigation, who is the official team sponsor for Team Forest, and we're very appreciative for them being this sponsor, as well as all of our sponsors for the 2021 Conservation Games, our other team sponsors, Ingle Family Farms and Res, and all of the many sponsors who have made this possible and will be supporting us for the closing ceremonies that are coming up on Sunday. So if you haven't already registered, please go online and let us know that you're coming. We have already ordered the food. We have the beverages. We've got the tent set up, and all of the picnic tables and benches that Team Fields built as their volunteer. They've already been delivered out to Malvern Hill. Please come early at 4, even though the invitation said 5, and the program will start at 5. The whole property is really open for you to kind of walk and explore, and if you've not been there, it's an incredibly beautiful property, and we welcome you to celebrate with us on Sunday. And with that, I just want to say thank you. Have a great evening, and we look forward to many more opportunities to engage with you in the very near future.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Terry and Christine.
Yep. Thank you.
Good night.
Bye-bye.